Hey, shiftyestribe. A few conversations that came up this month around workplace and company culture that I want to address are these three things that I think are really juicy. Number one, how do you maintain good cohesive culture as you grow when companies are growing a lot? Second one is how do you deal with behavior and performance issues in regards to culture and sort of that connection? And the third one is how do you make culture really integrated? How do you make it stick and last in an organization? So number one, how do you maintain good cohesive culture in an organization that is growing a lot and adding a lot of employees? And the answer to that is there's a quote that I love that you may have heard before, but that is that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today. And there is never an early enough time to start talking about culture. And when you have a startup or a very tight sort of like smaller team or organization and you're experiencing a lot of growth, you should be intentional about creating your culture early on so that as you grow and as you add more locations or employees, etc., as an organization, when you bring people on, you're onboarding them to say, this is our culture, right? That we already have a defined, concrete, specific culture that's integrated in what we do. So as we onboard people, it's like, this is what you're coming into, as opposed to adding 50, 100, 500 employees, and each of those people contributes to and like impacts the culture in a different way. So your culture is like moving with the wind, as opposed to being like, this is what the culture is. So the answer to that is like define culture now. Have conversations about like with intention, how do we show up? What are the behavior expectations, right? How do we hold each other accountable? How do we integrate this culture into everything that we do so that as you grow, you can maintain that sort of like core fundamental culture. And number two, talking about behavior and performance issues in regards to culture. And a conversation that happens a lot of time with me when I'm talking to leaders and organizations is around, how do I change this behavior? I had this employee or this location and they're negative, or just I have these like behavior performance issues that I want to address. And I always respond by saying, do you have a very intentional, specific culture that is like strategic and outlined, that is like very clear, that everybody understands how to behave and like what is expected of them? The answer to that is always no. And I think that when you have a very defined, clear and articulate culture that says this is how you're expected to show up and behave and contribute here, both in your attitude and also the performance of your role, then when you have a behavior issue or a challenge around either performance or behavior, like I said, that you can sit down with that person, that team, that employee and say, hey, this behavior is out of alignment with our culture. This is something that is like expected of every single one of us. You've known about it, I know about it, all of us are sort of like, right, this is what it takes to be here and be successful, and this behavior is out of alignment with this culture. So it's not a personal thing as a leader where I'm saying, I don't like this behavior from you. I'm saying, this is our culture that you know about, that we all are committed to and are expected to show up in alignment with, and this behavior, these things are out of alignment with that. So the coaching conversation is less personal. It's more about like, this is our culture, these behaviors don't fit here. And when you have that, and when you say, and you integrate sort of like, this is our commitment as a team to show up in these ways, you have less of those performance, like individual behavior issues, and that's an easier conversation to say, hey, this thing that's happening doesn't line up with this, so we need to get you there. And then we coach people into this space of greatness. And the third conversation is, how do you really integrate culture and make it stick? And that's a really important one, because shifting culture, creating culture, is not an overnight thing. It's not something you can just snap your fingers and have it change overnight. It's not something you can do in a week. It takes a long time. And so culture has to be something that we do every single day, instead of like these huge big moments of culture. Even like creating and defining like your culture plan, right, as a strategic priority, still to implement those things, it takes a long time. And so it's important as leadership that we're not just chasing the next shiny thing, right, and giving people whiplash around like, now we're doing this thing, now we're doing this thing. But to pick something, right, like the strategic culture plan, implement it and take time and let it, like, it takes 6 months, it takes a year to create the culture that you really, really want. And it's important to like stick with that, give it time, be patient, and like continue to do the work. But actually how you implement it is also the other side of that. Is it's important for us to decide all the ways that we are going to integrate culture into everything that we do, right? So in our onboarding, in our coaching and feedback with people, right, our performance reviews, in the way that we distribute information, the way that decisions are made by leadership, we have to integrate our values and our behaviors into every single thing that we do so that it remains top of mind and part of our fabric. So we have to identify all of the different ways that we're going to integrate these values, these behaviors into what we do so that we're reinforcing them all of the time, and they become part of people's like awareness and part of the fabric and DNA of our team. But that's such an important piece that we can't just say culture is this thing that we do once a year and then we just check in to see how we're doing with that. It has to be part of every single thing that we do. Cool. Okay, great. Those are the 3 questions. We love questions. Thank you. We'll see you next month.